Welcome back to More Moss to the People. I am Asa and I am your host. Today I have another guest from Toronto, Canada, week 2 with my Torontoites. Today I have Tammy Faulds with me, and she has a company called Inner Grief Coaching, and she is a death coach, a death doula, a grief coach, and I've already had her on the podcast one time. She is my first guest that I have had back for a second visit. So welcome back, Tammy. Thank you so much for joining me again. How are you?
Oh my gosh, thank you. Absolutely honored to be back. And I
Yay!
love that we're piggybacking on Torontoites. It's
Yeah.
amazing.
Is that what you
No,
would call it?
yeah, sure.
Sure.
Same thing I talk about. Oh, well, my friend in Sweden. I'm like, ooh.
Ooh, Sweden. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so thanks for so much for having me back.
Thank you. Tell us a little bit about yourself. If somebody didn't listen to the 10th episode of season 1, where Tammy was my guest the first time, tell us a little bit about where you're at today, because I mean, a lot has happened, a lot has shifted since we spoke the last time. Give people an idea who you are, my darling.
Oh my gosh. I mean, I won't take up too much time. But
Do,
in
please do.
short, yeah, I started this journey in life coaching about 12 years ago. And as I got talking to people more and more about their fears, everything kind of boiled down to this fear of death. So I got very curious about that. And people are interested and curious, but still felt very, kind of separate from them, or they were just too scared to talk about it.
Mm.
So that's when I went into grief and kind of rebranded myself as a grief coach, because all my life, right, I had cancer as a child. My mom
Mm.
worked in a nursing home. I used to work in home care for seniors. I've always been around death, loss, and grief, and I've always been very comfortable talking about it. So as I got more into grief coaching and learned this, evidence-based proven process called the grief recovery method, oh my gosh, it's just been such an honor to hold that space for people as they liberate themselves from the pain of their past. So
Mm.
that's where I've been focused. And not surprisingly, death comes back into the picture, even though grief just isn't associated with death. There's over 40 types of loss. But as I started attracting more people that maybe had a terminal diagnosis, or here in Canada, you can do medical assistance in dying, known as MAID. So helping people just process, again, all the grief, that comes with actual physical losses or loss of health or that sort of thing. So,
Mm.
so I've always been in this circle of grief, loss, and death, and loved shining a light on a traditionally dark topic.
Yeah, which, I think that's also something that attracts me to it. It's not that I'm attracted to dark topics, but, well, I kind of am. But you said that you have worked in so many different types of careers and put yourself in all these places. Do you think that you grew into having a comfort with talking about death, or was that something that was already inside of you and you just happened to put yourself into places because you could talk about it?
Probably a little both,
Yeah.
Again, looking back, I was 6 years old when I was diagnosed. So I
Mm.
knew limited,
Yeah.
right? I knew I had cancer. I didn't know what it was. I knew it didn't feel good. I
Mm-mm.
knew people on my floor were, dying. I knew I was lucky. So I kind of always had a curiosity, and even if we can talk, about astrological birth charts, but there is a planetary party in my 8th house, which is all,
Mm.
loss, death, like all those things. So it's kind of just saying it's a little bit of both. I think it was, growing up in a world of just hospitals and then marrying that with kind of, again, celestially or intrinsically, however you want to look at it, that
Mm.
I've just always been, able to look at it with a different lens, and not seeing it so much as a fearful thing, but how it can teach us.
Mm. Well, the last episode we had was titled "We're All Gonna Die One Day. So how do you want to live today?" And coming back to today now, where my interest, my deep interest and pull in working with Swedish death cleaning and decluttering and helping people with the conversations of, as a 56-year-old, what I'm seeing in my family, that aging is happening, sicknesses are happening now more quickly. And the older I get, of course, I wasn't thinking about this stuff before. Now, I am. It's very, very apparent in my life and in my family that it is time to be having these conversations. And the more I'm having these conversations, it's kind of like a 50-50 where some people are like, I know I really got to get on that. I really got to start doing something. Other people are like, don't talk to me about that. It scares the living shit out of me to talk about it. I'm like, okay. So you, with all of your experience and your background, and starting at the age of 6, that you have been surrounded with this at a very young age, and you now have continued on in the same, having this kind of surrounding you. But first with the party planning, which you were event planning, you were doing that kind of stuff, and then you rolled into, which we'll get into later, but learning how you handle conversations, and how I had no idea there was 40 different types of grief, for example. Can you just like share a couple, like, because everything is around death, right? Like, oh, your animal dies, your parent dies, that's the kind of grief. But can you give us like some other examples of different types of grief that people don't maybe
Yeah,
think?
so 40 different types of loss.
40 different
So
types of loss.
a type, would be like an intangible. So I always give the example of the pandemic, right? Global, we all felt it. And it was the loss of routine, safety, community, trust, freedom. Some, and then more tangible, loss of jobs, finances, loved ones. But it was more those intangible that people can like, why am I so uncomfortable right now?
Yeah.
And I love it. The Harvard Business Review came out with an article that said that discomfort you're feeling, it's grief, because we had immense loss in an absolutely accelerated short time frame, right? Because we just all of a sudden one day it's going to be a couple of weeks, we'll be back to work, and then it's like after months and months and months. So that's kind of the biggest one people can relate to, is those intangible losses.
Yeah.
Anticipatory grief is another form where it's grieving the loss of something that hasn't happened yet. And the example I give here is often you have dementia. So maybe your parent has been diagnosed, they're still here, but you're grieving who you knew or who that person was to you. As well as, there's even other intangibles we talked about with my girlfriends around loss of fertility, right? As we go into, as we're in our 50s, as we're transitioning to perimenopause and menopause, that loss of fertility. Or even I had a parent tell me yesterday, that I'm just grieving the stages even of my child who is growing. And things are great. Same with going to university, or you move. These are really wonderful things, but you're kind of grieving what was. Because grief, by definition, that I use, which is from the Grief Recovery Institute, is that grief is the change of or ending of a familiar pattern of behavior. So there's conflicting, confusing emotions that come up with that change. So when you think of it that way, that's when you're like, okay, there's a lot of loss. It could be from a young age where you didn't make the soccer team, through to the marriage that didn't work, or the job loss, or the actual death of a person or a pet that you love. And really getting into the impact on your heart of that. Because for some, losing a dog might be whatever, get another dog. But for me, and I give that example, when I was a teenager and my dog died, because when I was so sick, that dog never left my side. He knew, when I really needed some love. So when he passed, I was devastated, or whatever, it was a dog. I'm like, no, I understand, so family. Even though that wasn't actual death, but just understanding grief is, again, it's the normal, natural response to any type of loss. Because we're taught how to get things in life. We're not taught what to do when we lose them.
That's so true. Yeah. Gosh, that is so true. And, it's like, just get through it. Just buckle down and just keep on pushing, it's like, keep pushing, just get into something else, do something else, focus on something else. So interesting, because when you and I were talking about having you back on, we were talking about the potential of doing death differently. How can we look at death or from a different perspective of, it doesn't have to be like doom and gloom. How can we potentially put ourselves in the mind frame of, okay, well, this is the only 100% thing that actually is going to happen. I mean, there is no denying it. So what can we do to prepare differently? And if you would share some of your thoughts around that.
Well, this is why I love talking about it, because there's no definitive answer.
Yeah.
No one has died and come back and said, here's exactly what happens, and here's what you expect, and here's how you prepare for it. So with that, I find a lot of comfort in stories, that work, that make me feel better about it. So I actually ended up writing a whole course called Do Death Differently, where I go through the chakra system and look at, so if we have been told these stories, and again, I'm talking from a North American or Canadian perspective of, like the Grim Reaper kind of comes and like these horror stories, right? They're so scary, and death is so scary. What if we feminized it? What if it was more here to teach us, again, like how we talked last time about how you're living, but to soften it, to get you to understand death more, again, knowing that 100% of us are going to die one day. We don't know when. And the stories, and I take one from the Ojibwe tradition, and I can send you the link for it because it's an oral. So I actually did a recording where they talk about the land of the living going, and then you cross the river to the land of the ancestors. It's also rooted in some Greek, like where you pay the ferryman by putting pennies on the eyes when they take you across the river. But I find a lot of comfort in this because it shows that there's just a lot of love that goes into that transition. So again, in the Ojibwe tradition, it's that the person is put into a canoe, which is shaped kind of like a human body. The ribs of the canoe kind of mirror the bones of the body. And it's the grief of the living that propels that boat halfway across the river, and how the oars are even shaped sort of like teardrops. And it's that mourning that kind of pushes the boat across. And then the land of the ancestors across the river, they're like, woohoo, Tammy's coming. Let's get ready. It's going to be a party, and so they kind of meet halfway, and then they pull, the soul over to that side.
How beautiful.
And because again, I really find a lot of comfort in these stories. And let's be clear, they are stories. Because again, no one knows definitively what happened or what happens when you die. So instead of the fearful ones, I want to choose something that brings me more peace and comfort in my current day. Because when the time goes, when you hear all those near-death experience stories too, there's a lot of synergies, a lot of, themes around that of like, it's just so peaceful and beautiful. So again, I'm going to choose.
That's right. Believe. That's exactly what I was just going to say. It's like, this is a choice. I get to choose how I believe I'm going, what it's going to be like when it actually happens. And I am not personally afraid of death or dying for my own sake. I have concerns about other people, but not for my own sake. And so the idea of, I heard once that somebody said to me, no one ever dies alone. Meaning, even if you are in the room alone by yourself, your guides, your ancestors, I think this is a beautiful thing, that your guides and ancestors are actually the ones reaching over their hands to you, kind of like you were talking about the river where they meet you halfway. And so there's always somebody there for you. Now, you also said, it was such a beautiful story. You were talking about an Irish folklore about what were you saying? Can you repeat that for us? So people can know what that was. So nice.
I went to a death symposium pre-pandemic. It was such a wonderful gathering. It was about 250 people. And again, I just didn't feel like the weirdo in the room who wanted to talk about death.
I'm not alone.
Yeah. And they had this speaker from Ireland, and he's from I can't remember the exact island off of the coast of Ireland. But he talked about in their community how everyone gathers. It's a small island. So what happens is when someone's dying, there's, the loved ones around, but the women, they'll keen. So keening is this singing that happens when, so he gave the example of once the dying process, so kind of the death rattle, like there's definitive signs of when the process is happening, it's imminent. And so once that, rattle starts, the one woman, the head keener, will start singing a familiar phrase. I think it was actually a Bible verse. I can't quite remember, but then the woman next to her will start singing, and everyone just joins in a chorus. So that it's almost this siren call that goes out to the community. So you hear the song, you're like, oh, okay, we need to drop everything and come to where the source of that sound is.
Mm.
So he was saying that it doesn't matter if you're visiting,
Right.
family,
Right.
everyone goes and everyone participates in helping this person transition. So it's
Mm.
almost like a lullaby that they're singing them
Mm.
through. And the beauty of that is A, it's happening in community, and B, you're actually witnessing the process of dying. So I think that's where a lot of fear is,
Yeah.
is that we don't know what happens. Because traditionally it happens in a hospital, behind a curtain, nursing homes, literally, people die, they're put, it's not, they're just kind of, I'd say, but they're disposed of, but they're right. It's just something that's very secret and hushed and behind closed doors.
Right.
Even common funerals, right? You don't see what happens. You just see the body if it's being viewed, when it's done. You're like, oh,
Mm.
okay, they were here, now they're gone.
Right.
So this
All of
this
a
Irish
sudden.
tradition, yeah, just has you see it so that whenever it happens to someone close to you, or even for yourself, you're like, oh, I know what to
Mm.
expect. Not that every
Yeah.
death is the same by
No.
any stretch, but you've been exposed, as you said, to about 500 of these, if in the general timeline of your life,
Yes.
yeah, you've got a lot of experience.
And then there isn't as much fear because, like you say, then you know what to expect. I'm
Yeah.
sorry if you're hearing a lot of noise in the background. I'm not sure if that's picking up or not, but so I just think that is such a beautiful thing because of the idea of the people being around with community. Like you said, the community. I experienced my father dying and another friend of the family, and I've seen dead people, and it's like I'm not afraid. I don't know why. I mean, it wasn't horrifying. It was of course tragic because my father died of cancer, but uh at that point, that at this point he was already gone. I mean, physically he was there, but hardly. And so he had already, in my mind, transitioned. And having that, the actual experience of that, I think, has helped me to be able to have this conversation like you have been able to see this since you were 6 years old. Now, you had said to me, and you said earlier today, that there is such a thing now in Canada that assisted dying, excuse me. And I wasn't even aware that that was something. I've heard of it in Switzerland, and you said that it was in California and Canada. Is that correct? That this is something that's available to people?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and other places as well. I'm not
Yeah.
familiar completely, but yeah, it was here. Was it it's like June 2016, I think, or something. That's been around for a while and obviously ever evolving and ever changing because it really does
Mm.
bump up against a lot of morals and
Yeah.
beliefs
Yeah.
for people.
Sure.
But those that have participated, and I wrote an article on it, I called Made with Love because it's
Mm.
medical assistance in dying. And actually, that's one of my top performing articles I've written,
Huh.
is because people are recognizing, okay, well, how, if this person has chosen, to end their life this way, there's a lot of conflicting, confusing emotions that come up for their loved ones.
Mm.
So how can we love them through this? Because often that's what happens in death, is that, I hate to say it, but our egos take over. I don't
Yeah.
want you to go. I'm not ready for you to
Mm.
go. And so, especially when they're choosing a date, right? Kind of
Yeah.
like when and there's a lot of similarities with birth, So those that have, cesareans that are choosing a date for the baby to be born, it's a similar thing. It's like, oh my gosh, you're choosing a date that you're going to leave us?
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
want that. There's a lot
No.
of
Yeah.
people want it to be very natural, and it is. But yeah, so there's a lot of, again, it's a lot of controversy around it, but there's also a lot of beauty. The stories that have been written, even with younger people, and having those living funerals, so they know
I know.
they're
I'd
going to
never
go.
heard of that. Gosh, explain that,
Yeah.
would you please? That was fascinating for me.
Yeah, actually, my first exposure to it was one of my absolute favorite books, Tuesdays with Morrie. So have you ever
Oh,
read
yeah.
that?
Yes, I have.
But by Mitch Albom, and he has a living funeral. And to his point, he's like, I want to hear what people are talking, saying about me while I'm
Mm.
here. And so it's the same sort of sentiment that, and similarly, a friend of mine who had a reoccurrence of cancer did a living funeral in a
Mm.
local park here, invited, all the close friends and loved ones. And it was that celebration of life,
Mm.
So again, you craft that however you want it to be, but you're able to participate, right? And
Mm.
hear all these things and say your goodbyes. And as hard as it is, it gives you that time together,
Mm.
because that's all everyone ever wants, you know, is
Yeah,
just more time. So
that's right.
this actually makes it a nice ritual and ceremony so that your soul can kind of catch up to what's happening.
That is, that just, my head went, "Phew." I said, what?
Yeah.
That's it. That's something possible. I'm like, why not? Why not? And, from, we talked about nature and the importance, and you used a word I had never used before, because, the more moss, the people, getting out into the nature, going out into the moss and reconnecting, for me, to God, spirit, connecting to myself and Mother Nature. That is so important. And I didn't really realize that. I mean, I know that I do it, and it makes me feel so present. And then you mentioned a term called biophilia. Can you
Yeah.
explain a little bit about that?
Yeah, brand new to me as well. And I'm fascinated. And it basically translates to humans' innate need to connect with other sentient beings. So plants, animals, and nature, right? And how for me, it's always been about those cycles and the seasons. So just looking out your window, right? It's
Yeah,
going to be fall here soon. Like the temperature's starting to drop, so just seeing like that's the death of nature, the
yeah,
trees are
the
shedding all their
natural.
leaves, and then winter, the nurturing and everything it's very busy underground. We can't see it, but there's a
Right.
lot going on. But it's a time to be quiet and to be reflective, right? So that spring, when the renewal and the heat of summer,
Mm,
the abundance and harvest, and all the
yeah,
things that happen there. So how can we harness that power of nature to help nurture? So I was saying, like, it's like nurturing in nature because we're innately drawn to it, right? And
right.
I did a survey of my subscribers a while ago, and it's wild. I was like, yeah, how have you used nature? And people are just like, man, when shit goes down, you're gonna find me by the water.
Yeah.
You're gonna find me at the mountain. You're like, they absolutely know what they need to
Mm,
help them ground, to nurture themselves, to feel like they're a part of something bigger, right? Than
yeah.
whatever's happening in your world. You can connect to, and whatever you want to call it. I jokingly call it Gus, which is, God, universe, or spirit, whatever
Gus.
it is that just reminds you that, oh yeah, I'm a part of something bigger. There's a oneness here
Mm,
that helps you just to exhale a bit and come
mm,
back and
mm,
ground. That's why literally getting your feet, as
yeah.
you talk about in your forest walks,
Mm,
to really just immerse yourself in it,
mm.
instead of spinning and web MDing what's going on, or
Yeah.
whatever
Oh
you might
no.
be dealing with. Like, oh, I'm going to go to Google and try to figure this out. No, we need to nurture.
Yeah. And I think that is nature versus nurture, nature and nurture. I mean, it's
Mhm.
what it how we inherently know. That's interesting. Plants, animals, and nature. Three of my
Yeah.
favorite things, and food.
Yeah.
Yeah, which kind
But
of gets
also
go
from
under
nature,
plants.
right?
Yeah, which could,
Yeah.
yeah.
And the more we can do that. And that's what I love, because even if you're, stuck on the couch or in bed, you can look out your window, you can hear the birds,
Mm,
you can, open a window and feel the breeze, that. So there's even ways when you are perhaps not physically able to get out.
yeah.
You can put on, even if you need to, right? Put on a nature show on TV,
Yeah.
Planet Earth, and just kind of
Oh
connect
yeah.
that way as
Oh
well.
yeah. We do that a lot. We don't have a television, so we watch National Geographic movies, and we can watch all these different other places in the world, so we can go to the ocean from home.
Yeah,
All we
exactly.
have to do is imagine that we're there. So when we were talking about, because I was discussing about, when I die, I want to be cremated, and that I would even like to have my ashes put into the forest where I spend most of my relaxing time. And then we talked about the the epic
Exit
end of
party.
life party. And it was, when I heard it, when you said it, I just started laughing, and immediately, like knee jerk, I was like, yes, yes, this sounds like such a perfect way to go out. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, right. Then again, this is a reframing, so your epic exit party, right? This is your, like musicians go on their farewell tour. It's like, here is my blowout party, and it's really funeral planning is what it is.
Really
But
what
again,
it
let's
is.
reframe it. So, because it is, and again, I have an extensive background in event planning. So that's where I'm looking to marry all of this now and helping people plan their end of life celebrations,
Mm,
which, even when you look statistically, way more people are doing that now than the traditional funeral.
yeah.
because it's more authentic, it's personalized, you know,
Yeah.
because there's nothing worse. And that's actually what piqued my interest years ago, was I went to a funeral for a friend's father who was a Harley riding, you know, rock and roll. And then we were in the, you know, the hushed tones and the wood
Yeah.
paneled walls of this funeral home. There was
Everybody's
not,
wearing suits.
yeah. I'm like, I never saw that guy in a suit my whole
Yeah.
life, you
Yeah.
know, and I'm like, you need leather chaps, you know, and a Harley
Yeah.
shirt. Like,
Yeah.
so
A
it just
party.
felt so disingenuous. And I'm like, I don't even know if are we grieving the right person? Are we in the right room? Like,
Yeah.
this is
Wait, am I
so
in the wrong
weird.
place? Yeah.
Yeah. So I was like, okay, well, how can we again just reframe this? And
Hmm.
it's starting to take off, which is wonderful that
Love it.
people are, and they can happen later too, right? So you can get through, it's obviously a tumultuous, you know, time. There's lots of paperwork, there's, you know,
Mm.
all that the funerals can keep doing. But your end of life, your epic exit party, what do you want that to look like?
Mm.
What, and kind of like a wedding planning, right? So the
Mm.
food, you know, the wine, the music, the decor, the colors, you know, what is it that can really just make people feel connected to you, and incorporating things, you know, from Swedish death cleaning, for example.
Yeah.
So there's grandma's tea set. No one wants the whole tea set, but you can lay out a table of all of, you know, for example, for me, it'd be, you know, all my music things. It'd be, you know, that everyone could take a little piece of you with
No,
them.
that's a
Or if,
great
you know, people
idea.
that are avid readers creating, you know, these custom bookmarks, or so
Mm.
that way you have a connection to that person beyond that event. But you're going to leave, and I've gone to these celebrations where you leave feeling so connected. It's like, man, that felt like I was hanging out with her again. Like, I have my
Yeah.
favorite playlist done. I'm a huge Prince fan. Everyone
Oh,
knows, you
yeah.
know,
It's
that Let's
awesome.
Go Crazy is the kickoff to the dance floor. Like, it's, and you're gonna feel, the hope is that you're going to feel really connected. And again, not disconnected like it have been at many of those funerals, you know,
Mm.
that are just, yeah, kind of just cookie cutter. You get the crust and
Yeah.
sandwiches.
Yeah.
And yeah, like I was reading about one
Mm.
where the dad just, breakfast was his big thing. Like, so even though the celebration was in the afternoon, everyone had breakfast
That sounds
together.
terrific. See, now that's, I love breakfast too. I just love,
Yeah.
I love
Yeah.
reframing, looking at something from a different perspective, because if it doesn't feel good, maybe it doesn't have to be that way for you. And if
Yeah.
it doesn't feel right, I mean, there was like, I talked to my mom about this after I had that conversation with you. I'm like, Mom, what do you think about this? And I told her about the people that were like, who are going to be getting their shots or whatever on Friday, and on Thursday there was a party and they had invited people to come in and say their goodbyes, and she's like, oh no, 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 that would never work. I'm like, Mom, it's already happening. It's already happening in the world. And she's like, but I don't want that. And I was like, oh, really? So what do you want? We started a conversation. I got a little bit out of her what she wanted, just a little bit, by her saying, no, 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 that's
Yeah.
not what I want. Oh, so tell me what you would like. Tell me something
Exactly.
that you would, which is, this is it. This is having the conversations. And that's why these you said all the paperwork, like to get everything in order, to have all your plans in place. I mean, having the conversation with the people that you love the most. This is, to me, the most beautiful conversation you'll ever have, and the highest of respect for self and for others. And then also to be able to have everything so clearly stated, and to have your epic end of life party thrown in there, and the people know exactly what you want to have at this party, with the food and the drinks and the dance and the music and the entertainment and Earth, Wind and Fire, and you want Prince, and you want
Yeah.
I just,
Yeah.
it sounds, that sounds nice. That sounds like a beautiful continuation of the circle,
Exactly.
the life death circle. And that is why the work that you are doing in the world, and it is so beautifully marrying all of your experiences to be able to offer this gift, the potential of even the idea, to the world. And that's why I had to get my girl back on here to talk about doing death differently, looking at it from a different perspective. Changing the way we look at things changes the way things are for us, for the world. You know, this is how big things start to shift. What a great conversation. I'm sure we're going to have you back again. Now, I told Jeff, or who I had on now this week, that I said, oh my gosh, I got to have you back. Maybe you, me, and Tammy can have
Yeah.
a conversation one day. So then we can have even more discussion around organization and the party and grief and talking about it and cleaning and like the documentation. I just love it. I love this.
Yeah. Well, and to our earlier point, right? This is something, as I joke about, I'm like, spoiler alert, we're all going to die one day.
Mm-hmm.
And so the more we can prepare, and again, for me, it starts with some of us need that reframing, right? Because it is very scary. And to your mom's point, it's like, nope, that's not for me.
Nope.
But that can also be the catalyst to be like, okay, well, what exactly she did, what do you want instead? So if we can start the conversation, be open, curious, right? There's no judgment. It's like, well, I'm going to do this, and if you don't do it, then that's the wrong way. Not at all. We just want to have something that's really authentic. Some may just want a private little garden party or have a cup of tea. It doesn't even really matter. It's just that you're having these wishes, expressed and documented.
Your own wishes.
Exactly. And the clearer that is, and that's even the role of the death doula a lot, is ensuring that the wishes of the dying person are upheld, because it's, again, such an emotional time that you can't be, your greatest advocate, when all this is happening, because you are just tied into so many other logistics and all the emotions. So the clearer we can be helps everyone, so that whenever the time comes, you just have to love them through that process, because everything's taken care of. You understand what's happening and what their wishes are. Doesn't mean it's exactly going to go to plan, but yeah, you'll know that if Prince is not at my my celebration,
I'm coming back to haunt.
But it's just a really beautiful thing, and it's something, again, it's such a connection piece for people, that if we can get through the fears, and we want to be really compassionate and empathetic, because those are a lot, really real fears for a lot of people. There's just so much benefit and love there. Again, if you think about the two tracks of life, generally it's fear and love. So if we can kind of move it over to the more, and I would say, like, love liberates, so we can lean more into that. And again, and like I talk about the end of life story, like it's all stories. So why not tell yourself a loving, compassionate, warm and fuzzy one?
That's right. That's the choice. Love leads. Love leads. That's it. Yeah. That is right, my friend. All right. Thank you so much for this beautiful conversation. Thank you for your time.
Yeah.
Thank you for your heart, for your expertise, your knowledge. And we'll put all your contact information, and please send anything that you would like to me, and I'll put it in the show notes as resources, anything that you have that you want to share, or references to anything. I would be honored to share whatever you have to give. And I know that my listeners would also love it.
Yes. Well, thank you again for the opportunity. And I cannot wait to see what happens with Swedish death cleaning for my favorite Swede.
Yes. Yeah. It's it feels really good. This whole conversation to me feels so, it pulls me forward, and I just keep meeting and being introduced to nice people. And this is it, when we're leading from our hearts and we're leading with love. This is what happens. The universe just unfolds for us.
And just a little, I'm just getting this hit, but also, if hearing this conversation pissed you off or triggered something or whatever, again, that's just something to get curious about. Just as you so lovingly did with your mom, she's like, no. Okay, well, let's talk, because again, if there's something that's coming up for you hearing about this, get curious, right? Compassionately curious about what that is, so you can understand. A little more.
And I think it's just super fat that I think that people think they have to talk about everything to somebody else. And sometimes this is like a super personal thing that they just want to maybe just consider doing it with yourself, just having a conversation with yourself, and then sitting and just writing your thoughts, almost like just journaling it, because it's safe. It's a safe place to start. And just to, well, they keep talking about being, having ashes or being put into a casket or whatever. I'm like, even if you start there, right? I mean, when my best friend died and I had no idea what he wanted, I had no idea because he'd never talked about it. I mean, he was young. We had never discussed it. Well, it's time. It's time. And if we could just maybe start just writing it down, and then maybe getting one person that you really feel safe with to have that discussion, just so somebody knows, just
Exactly.
little bit by little bit by little bit. And I think it's an excellent point that if you got angry, or if you got triggered, or if there's something that happened inside of you because it's brought up a bad memory or what have you, that's good. That's a good thing, because emotions need to keep moving. We need to keep moving through that and looking at them, and that's why we're here to help.
Yeah, and with that too, I do, and I'll put that in the show notes for you, but I have a free email series called Your Epic Exit Party that are kind of just those initial questions you can ask.
Yes. Oh my God. I might have to put that into my most beautiful love letter you've ever written, if I can use a part of yours and then give you credit for it. Oh my gosh. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about that. Yay. So fun. I know, we could talk for days. Thank you so much. You take good care of yourself. You have a beautiful day there in Canada. 11 o'clock. Yeah.
Thank you, my love.
Thank you. Thank you. We'll see you again next time.
Yes. Bye.
Take care. Bye.